So you had a gun in your purse?
I had a gun in my purse, and this guy wouldn't leave me alone because he was just sure I was playing hard to get and that I was really...
I get very emotional when people bring it.
At 79, Dolly Parton has finally chosen to explain the promise she made long ago, a promise so deeply personal that she guarded it for decades. To the world, Dolly has always been open, joyful, and fearless, sharing her music, humor, and wisdom without hesitation. But behind the rhinestones and laughter was a vow she rarely spoke about, one that quietly shaped her choices, her marriage, and the way she lived her life. For years, fans speculated. Some believed it was about love. Others assumed it was about fame, faith, or sacrifice. Dolly never corrected them. She smiled, deflected, and moved on, protecting the truth with the same grace she used to protect the people she loved most. But now, at an age when reflection outweighs secrecy, she's finally revealing why that promise mattered so much. And why breaking it was never an option. This revelation isn't about scandal or regret. It's about loyalty, loss, and a kind of devotion that doesn't need public validation. Dolly's words offer a rare glimpse into the woman behind the legend. A woman who understood early on that some promises are not meant to be celebrated, only honored. And as she finally explains the reason, it becomes clear that this vow wasn't a limitation. It was the quiet foundation of everything she became. Long before Dolly Parton became a global icon. Before the wigs, the rhinestones, and the unmistakable voice that could fill any room, she made a promise that would quietly shape her entire life. It wasn't announced in an interview or written into a song. It was made in private with intention and finality, at a time when her future was still uncertain and the world had no idea who she would become. At 79, Dolly is finally explaining why that promise mattered and why she never once considered breaking it. Growing up in rural Tennessee, Dolly learned early that words carry weight. Her family didn't have much, but they had faith, loyalty, and a deep respect for commitment. Promises weren't symbolic gestures. They were bonds. When you gave your word, you lived by it. That upbringing left a permanent mark on Dolly, shaping the way she approached relationships, work, and even fame. It also explains why the promise she made all those years ago became non-negotiable. The promise, as Dolly now reveals, wasn't about success or money. It was about protection. At a pivotal moment in her life, just as her career was beginning to rise, she recognized the danger of letting ambition swallow everything else. Fame offered opportunity, but it also threatened to take something from her that she valued deeply, the ability to belong to herself. She promised that no matter how big she became, she would never allow the industry to own her heart, her marriage, or her sense of identity. That vow became especially important after she married Carl Dean, the man who would remain her greatest constant. From the beginning, Dolly understood that their relationship could only survive if it stayed separate from the spotlight. Carl had no interest in fame, and she respected that. The promise she made was not just to him, but to herself, that she would never force her public world into their private one. At a time when celebrity marriages were unraveling under pressure, Dolly chose restraint instead of exposure. Over the years, rumors followed her relentlessly. Speculation about her marriage, her personal life, and the choices she made became part of her public narrative. But Dolly never took the bait. She smiled, told a joke, and redirected the conversation back to her work. What the world didn't realize was that her silence wasn't avoidance, it was devotion. Breaking that promise, even to satisfy curiosity, would have meant betraying something sacred. There were moments when it would have been easy to break it. Interviews offered temptation. Confessions could have fueled headlines. But Dolly believed that not everything meaningful needs to be explained. Some things gain their power from being protected. The promise gave her clarity in an industry built on excess. It reminded her that boundaries weren't limitations, they were freedoms. At 79, with nothing left to prove, Dolly speaks about that vow not with regret, but with gratitude. She believes it allowed her to live fully without losing herself. It kept her grounded when fame grew loud. It preserved a marriage built on trust rather than spectacle. And it gave her a sense of peace that success alone could never provide. This of her life isn't about revealing a secret for attention. It's about acknowledging the quiet discipline that shaped her journey. Dolly Parton didn't just rise to fame, she navigated it with intention. guided by a promise made in humility and kept with strength. And as she begins to explain why she promised it, one truth becomes clear. That vow wasn't a sacrifice. It was the reason she endured. When Dolly Parton's career began to soar, the promise she had made quietly moved from principle to protection. Fame didn't arrive gently, it arrived with expectations, demands, and a constant pull toward exposure. Suddenly, everyone wanted more than her voice. They wanted her story, her marriage, her private thoughts. And in an industry that thrives on access, saying no required more strength than saying yes. Dolly quickly learned that success comes with a price few people talk about. The higher she climbed, the more people felt entitled to explanations. Interviewers pushed. Headlines speculated. Rumors grew louder with every year that Carl Dean remained out of sight. Some assumed secrecy meant shame. Others decided mystery meant trouble. Dolly heard the whispers, read the stories, and understood exactly what the world expected her to do: break her. Silence and clear the air. She never did. Keeping that promise meant accepting misunderstanding as part of the cost. Dolly admits there were moments when the rumors hurt deeply. Not because they damaged her image, but because they distorted something precious. Her marriage was not fragile, hidden, or broken. It was protected. Carl didn't avoid the spotlight because of fear. He avoided it because he valued normalcy. Dolly honored that choice, even when it made her life harder. The pressure intensified as her fame grew. Confession had become currency in entertainment, and Dolly knew that revealing personal details would only increase her appeal. She could have turned her private life into a brand. Instead, she drew a line and never crossed it. That restraint confused people. How could someone so open be so private at the same time? The answer was simple. She understood the difference between generosity and surrender. The promise also shaped how she navigated temptation. Dolly was admired everywhere she went. Attention was constant, and admiration was often mistaken for intimacy. But she never allowed flirtation, fantasy, or ego to endanger what she had built. She believed that love didn't survive on trust alone, it survived on boundaries. And that promise became the boundary that kept her grounded when the world tried to pull her in every direction. There were sacrifices. Dolly won't pretend otherwise. Keeping parts of her life off limits meant carrying loneliness at times, especially when others misunderstood her choices. It meant letting false narratives exist without correction. It meant resisting the urge to defend herself when the truth would have been easier to explain. But she understood something most people don't. Not every truth needs an audience. Over time, the promise proved its worth. While many relationships around her fractured under scrutiny, hers endured quietly. Fame changed everything around her, but not the space she went home to. That consistency became her refuge. No matter how loud the world became, there was one place where she didn't have to perform, explain, or protect herself. The promise didn't cage her, it freed her. At 79, Dolly reflects on those years without bitterness. She doesn't regret the silence or the restraint. In fact, she credits that promise with preserving her joy. It allowed her to give the world her talent without giving away her soul. It reminded her that success doesn't come from revealing everything, it comes from knowing what to hold on to. This part of Dolly Parton's life reveals a truth often overlooked. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as consistency, as loyalty, as the quiet refusal to trade what matters for what sells. That promise didn't just protect her marriage, it protected the woman behind the legend. And as she looks back now, Dolly understands something with absolute clarity. Keeping her word didn't cost her happiness. It secured it. As the years went on, Dolly Parton began to understand the emotional weight of the promise she had made, not as a burden, but as a quiet companion that walked beside her through every season of her life. Fame continued to grow, opportunities multiplied, and her influence expanded far beyond anything she once imagined. Yet the promise remained unchanged, steady in a world defined by constant reinvention. It became the anchor that kept her emotionally balanced when everything else felt in motion. Privately, there were moments when keeping that promise felt lonely. Dolly was surrounded by people, adored by millions, yet certain parts of her life remained unspoken and unseen. She watched other artists turn their personal struggles into public narratives, receiving sympathy, understanding, and validation. There were times when she could have done the same, times when sharing would have been easier than staying silent. But she understood that validation from strangers could never replace peace at home. Carl Dean's presence, though invisible to the public, was deeply felt in her life. He became the safe space where she didn't have to be Dolly Parton, the icon. With him, she could be unguarded, ordinary, and real. That normalcy mattered more to her than applause. The promise ensured that their relationship remained untouched by the noise of fame, allowing it to grow in a way that felt authentic and unpressured. Dolly also faced personal challenges that tested her resolve. Career crossroads, moments of self-doubt, and the physical and emotional toll of constant performance weighed on her. In those moments, the temptation to confide publicly, to let the world see her vulnerability, was strong. But she reminded herself why she made the promise in the first place. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about sovereignty. Her life belonged to her, not to the industry or the audience. One of the most difficult aspects of keeping the promise was allowing others to misunderstand her intentions. Silence often invites interpretation, and not all of it was kind. Dolly accepted that reality with grace, even humor, choosing not to correct every false assumption. She believed that time, not explanation, would reveal the truth. And in time, it did. Her consistency spoke louder than any interview ever could. The emotional reward came slowly but unmistakably. Years passed, and her marriage endured without scandal or spectacle. Her sense of self remained intact. She was able to grow older in an industry that often discards women once they no longer fit a certain image. The promise gave her a foundation that didn't shift with trends. It allowed her to evolve without losing herself. At 79, Dolly reflects on those decades with a sense of peace that feels earned. She doesn't romanticize the difficulty, but she honors it. Keeping the promise required discipline, humility, and a willingness to disappoint expectations. But it also gave her something priceless, a life that felt whole. She could look back without wishing she had lived differently. This of her story reveals that the promise was never about restriction, it was about intention. Dolly chose what she would protect, and in doing so, she protected everything else. Her openness, generosity, and joy were not diminished by boundaries. They were strengthened by them. As she finally speaks about the promise now, she does so not to reveal a secret, but to offer perspective. Her story is a reminder that success does not require surrender, and that some of the most powerful choices are the ones made quietly and kept faithfully over a lifetime. At 79, Dolly Parton stands in a place few reach, a place of reflection without regret. Time has softened the urgency of secrecy and replaced it with clarity. The promise she made long ago no longer feels like something she must protect from the world. Instead, it feels like something she can finally explain. Not to justify herself, but to honor the life it helped preserve. Dolly now understands that the promise wasn't only about love or privacy, it was about balance. In an industry that constantly demanded more, she chose to decide what enough looked like for herself. That decision allowed her to thrive without losing her sense of humor, her generosity, or her compassion. The promise gave her permission to succeed without becoming consumed by success. As she looks back, Dolly sees how that vow influenced every major decision she made. It guided how she treated people, how she handled temptation, and how she navigated aging in the public eye. While others felt pressure to reinvent themselves endlessly, Dolly remained rooted. She adapted without abandoning who she was. That stability didn't come from luck, it came from intention. Her marriage to Carl Dean stands as the clearest testament to the promise. It endured not because it was perfect, but because it was protected. Dolly believes love doesn't need constant attention to survive, it needs respect. By keeping her private life private, she allowed her relationship to exist without performance, free from expectation or comparison. That freedom, she says, was the greatest gift she could have given both of them. Now, as she speaks openly about the promise, Dolly does so with gratitude rather than nostalgia. She doesn't mourn the things she didn't share with the world. She celebrates the peace that silence gave her. The promise allowed her to age with dignity in an industry that rarely allows women that grace. It gave her the confidence to remain joyful without explanation, strong without hardness, and open without exposure. Dolly's revelation isn't a dramatic confession, it's a lesson. She hopes others understand that boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when to open. Her life proves that you can be generous without being available to everyone, honest without being exposed, and successful without surrendering what matters most. As she looks toward the future, Dolly carries the promise differently now. It no longer feels like a rule, it feels like wisdom passed forward. She knows her story will outlive her, not because of secrets finally revealed, but because of choices consistently honored. In the end, the reason Dolly Parton promised it becomes beautifully simple. She wanted a life she could live, not just a story others could consume. And in keeping that promise, she built something rare: fame without emptiness, love without spectacle, and a legacy rooted not in what she revealed, but in what she protected. That promise didn't limit her life. It defined it.